There is a small stone spring in the Texas Hill Country that has bubbled clear blue water for thousands of years. The kind of place where generations of local teenagers learn to swim and dive. In the last few years, for the first time anyone has ever recorded, it simply stopped flowing. This is the story of 10 Texas cities and towns where the water underground is running out, where family wells are going dry, and where home values are starting to slide with the water table. Texas built its modern boom on cheap land and endless growth, and nobody printed a warning about the aquifer on the brochure. Here is a taste of what is ahead. A panhandle city may hand over a decade of its own drinking water future to a single industrial customer. A hill country family took out a $40,000 loan just to get running water back in their own house. And a West Texas county has ground that opened into sinkholes big enough to swallow a truck. If you own property in Texas, or you are thinking about retiring here, stick around and tap that subscribe button now. Let's start the countdown at number 10. Number 10, San Angelo. San Angelo sits in the Concho Valley of West Texas, a ranching town anchored by Goodfellow Air Force Base and a handful of surrounding reservoirs with names like O.C. Fisher, Twin Buttes, and E.V. Spence. Those lakes were never built for West Texas rainfall. During the long drought years of the last decade and a half, several dropped to a tiny fraction of normal capacity, low enough that boat ramps sat stranded on dry, cracked mud far from any water. The city leaned harder on groundwater and new pipelines to hold its supply steady. Rural listings now lean on details about private wells and water co-op membership. The fine print buyers read before they ask about the kitchen. The city is not collapsing, but the acreage market tied to private wells has cooled, with properties sitting longer while buyers wait to see whether the water holds. San Angelo is a quiet opening chapter, a reminder that the reservoir behind your house is never as permanent as it looks on a map. If you are finding this useful, hit that like button and share this video with anyone you know who owns land or a home anywhere in Texas. Number 9. Winkler County. Out in the Permian Basin sits Winkler County, home to the small town of Wink, and one of the strangest water stories in the state. Decades of oil and gas activity here, including old wells and underground wastewater injection, let water reach buried layers of salt far below the surface, slowly dissolving the salt and hollowing out the ground from beneath. In the early 2000s, the earth gave way, and two massive sinkholes opened near Wink, one growing to hundreds of feet across and more than 100 feet deep, swallowing roads, fences, and open ranchland. Scientists monitoring the region by satellite have since found the ground across a wider stretch of the county sinking and shifting, some spots moving several inches a year, a slow collapse you cannot see but can measure. Land near the known sinkholes has become nearly unsellable for anything beyond oilfield use. Winkler County proves that in Texas, it is not always the sky running dry that gets you. Sometimes it is what happens underground once water and salt start dissolving each other away. Number 8. Robert Lee. Robert Lee is a tiny Coke County town of a few hundred people, built along the shoreline of Lake E.V. Spence. For decades, this lake was the town's entire identity. Its fishing tournaments, its lake houses, its weekend tourism income. Then a punishing multi-year drought pushed the lake down to roughly 1% of its normal capacity, reducing it to a shallow, muddy remnant, surrounded by miles of exposed, cracked lakebed. Boat docks that once floated on deep water ended up sitting on dry ground hundreds of yards from any shoreline. Property that had sold at a premium because it sat on the water suddenly sat on a view of dust, and resale interest in lakefront homes collapsed with the lake. Even after rain refilled the reservoir, the damage lingered, since buyers now understand a lake house here is only as good as the next drought allows. Robert Lee is small, but it is a miniature version of a much bigger Texas problem: water-dependent property values sitting on reservoirs never guaranteed to stay full. Number 7. Wichita Falls. Wichita Falls sits in North Texas, best known for a small man-made waterfall built downtown after the original natural falls washed out generations ago, a joke that got much less funny during the drought that gripped the region in the early 2010s. When reservoirs dropped dangerously low, the city took one of the most extreme conservation steps in modern American history, building a pipeline connecting the outflow of its wastewater plant straight into the drinking water plant, turning sewage that morning into tap water that same day. It worked, and it kept the city from running dry, but it also became a symbol of just how close North Texas reservoirs can get to empty. Since then, the city has invested in additional pipelines and a second reuse system to drought-proof itself. though the surrounding housing market has stayed flat and affordable, with buyers now asking pointed questions about water security first. Number 6. Dripping Springs. Dripping Springs sits just west of Austin, at the gateway to the hill country, and over the last 2 decades, it has become one of the fastest-growing small cities in the country, with wineries and new subdivisions replacing scattered ranchland. Almost none of that growth changed the geology underneath it. Most of the area draws from the Trinity Aquifer, the same slow recharging source that supplies much of the western hill country, and regional planners project average declines of around 30 feet across the Trinity system over coming decades, as pumping outpaces limited rainfall. Local groundwater districts have grown stricter about new well permits, slowing some development and pushing others toward trucked-in water. Newer listings increasingly disclose limited water availability, and buyers now walk away from otherwise perfect properties once the water situation looks uncertain. Dripping Springs built its brand on hill country charm. It never advertised that the charm sat on a shrinking aquifer. We are almost halfway through this countdown, and the next 5 towns get more serious. If you have not already, tap that like button and subscribe so you catch every future breakdown the moment it goes live. Number 5. Boerne and Kendall County. Boerne sits in Kendall County northwest of San Antonio, a German-founded hill country town along Cibolo Creek that has repeatedly ranked among the fastest-growing communities in the country, pulling in retirees and families priced out of San Antonio and Austin alike. Like its neighbors, Boerne sits largely over the Trinity Aquifer, and pumping across Kendall, Comal, and Hays counties combined roughly doubled in under 2 decades, and has kept climbing, more straws in the same limited cup, drawn down faster than the limestone can refill. Local utilities lean on Trinity wells and imported surface water contracts to keep pace with new rooftops, and officials have discussed future restrictions on new connections if growth keeps outstripping supply. Boerne remains beautiful, but its runway for unlimited growth is nowhere near as long as the last 20 years might suggest. Number 4. Wimberley and Hays County. Wimberley sits in the heart of the hill country in western Hays County, home to Jacob's Well, the spring mentioned at the start of this video. 2 generations ago, roughly 40,000 people lived in Hays County, drawing from about 14,000 homes, tied straight to the Trinity Aquifer, a supply that felt limitless at the time. Today, Hays County has grown past 220,000 residents, and the local groundwater district now says the aquifer is effectively tapped out. Recent monitoring found every tract well below its historic level, the worst conditions in more than 20 years, worse than the severe drought of 2011. Well levels that used to recover to around 500 feet are now settling closer to 660 or 690 feet, and the district has stopped issuing new permits since there is no evidence the aquifer can support more demand. Drilling a new, deeper well out here can now cost $75,000 or more. One subdivision took out a $40,000 loan just to restore water after its second well went dry, and residents lived under a boil water notice for more than half a year. Jacob's Well itself has now stopped flowing on more than one occasion, something never recorded before. Wimberley did not lose its water overnight. It lost it one dry summer at a time. If this is opening your eyes, take a second to subscribe so you never miss the next breakdown, and share this with anyone you know house hunting in the Lone Star State. Number 3. El Paso. El Paso sits at the far western tip of Texas, a border city of roughly 700,000 people, wedged between the Franklin Mountains and the Rio Grande, sharing its water problems with 2 countries and 2 states at once. The city has historically relied on the Rio Grande along with the Hueco Bolson and Mesilla Bolson aquifers beneath the desert, and decades of heavy pumping have drawn the Hueco Bolson down significantly, with water quality degrading as fresher water gets pulled out and saltier water intrudes from deeper layers. On top of that, El Paso's share of the Rio Grande has been squeezed by ongoing disputes between Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico, plus reduced mountain snowpack upstream. El Paso Water has responded aggressively, building one of the largest inland desalination plants in the world and investing heavily in recycling, and the city deserves credit for planning further ahead than most neighbors. Even so, the math stays difficult. A growing desert city on a shrinking river, and a stressed aquifer at once, with rising utility rates now a line-item buyers weigh against the price tag. Number 2. Lubbock. Lubbock sits on the flat South Plains of West Texas, the largest Texas city built almost entirely on the Ogallala Aquifer, home to well over 250,000 people and the economic engine of the region. The Ogallala is the largest aquifer in the country, stretching under 8 states, but Texas sits at its thin southern edge, where the rock is shallower and recharges far more slowly than farther north. Across the Texas High Plains, the Ogallala has declined an average of around 44 feet since the middle of the last century, with some wells dropping more than 265 feet. Natural recharge across the Texas portion runs roughly 1 inch a year, meaning what gets pumped out essentially never returns within a lifetime. In a sign of how valuable this resource has become, the late oilman T. Boone Pickens sold water rights beneath more than 200,000 acres of his Panhandle ranchland in 2011 for $103 million, water piped south toward Lubbock today. Planners warn the statewide shortfall could reach nearly 7 million acre-feet a year by 2070 if current plans are not carried out. For Lubbock homeowners, this shows up as rising utility costs and a growing sense the affordable plains around the city sit on an account overdrawn for decades. Number 1. Amarillo. Amarillo is the largest city in the Texas Panhandle, home to more than 200,000 residents, and it earns the top spot because of a decision unfolding right now that could reshape its water future for generations. Like Lubbock, Amarillo depends heavily on the same shrinking Ogallala Aquifer, a resource regional experts already project could last only another 30 to 50 years under current demand. This fall, the Amarillo City Council has been weighing a water supply agreement with an industrial energy company planning a massive new data and energy campus just outside the city. The initial proposal would commit close to 900 million gallons annually for up to 40 years, but the company has signaled it could eventually request as much as 10 million gallons a day, well over 3.5 billion gallons a year, enough that experts warn it could compress the aquifer's remaining lifespan down to as little as 15 to 25 years. Combine that with the existing decline, roughly a foot lost every year, and Amarillo faces a choice between economic development and long-term water security, playing out in council meetings right now. For homeowners, that uncertainty is filtering into conversations about property values, since no lender wants a 30-year mortgage in a city whose water source has an uncertain expiration date. Of every city on this list, none stares more directly at one decision that could determine whether its water lasts a generation or barely a decade. So there it is, 10 Texas cities and towns where the water underground is disappearing, and the housing markets on top of it are starting to feel it. Before you swear off the entire state, here is the honest, balanced truth, because that is the whole point of this channel. Texas is not facing a sudden crash. Most of these markets are cooling and asking harder questions rather than collapsing overnight, and plenty of homeowners across the state sit on solid equity in cities with secure water supplies. Look closely at who is actually thriving. Cities that invested early in diversified water portfolios, desalination, recycling, and pipeline contracts are weathering this best, while towns that kept approving rooftops without asking where the next glass of water was coming from keep showing up on lists like this one. So here is the one lesson worth remembering. If you are buying property anywhere in Texas, or anywhere in the drought-prone South and West, do not stop at the school district and the countertops. Ask where the water actually comes from. Ask whether that source is growing, shrinking, or stretched thin. Ask what the plan is for the day the well runs low, or the district stops issuing permits. Out here, that is never just a small detail. It is the single most important question you can ask before signing anything. If this video helped you understand what is really happening beneath the Texas housing market, hit that like button and subscribe, because a new deep dive drops every single week. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.